Dad told me to find a husband when I asked to work in the family firm. In 6 months, I changed everything. Imagine standing in front of the man who's always told you you're not good enough, watching him throw away everything you've worked for, just because you're his daughter. That's exactly what happened to me. But instead of shrinking away, I built something bigger than he could ever imagine. Novatech. In this video, I'll show you how I turned rejection into a victory. Stick with me to see the shocking moment when everything changed. You won't believe how the tables were turned. My name is Dorothy Grant, and for as long as I can remember, I've been trying to earn my father's approval. Growing up in New York, under the shadow of Grant Enterprises, it felt like nothing was ever enough. I watched as my father, Charles Grant, built his empire brick by brick while I stood by, trying to convince him that I was the one who could carry the torch when the time came. But despite my best efforts, the gap between what he expected and what I could give him grew wider and wider. I should have seen it coming. I should have known that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I sacrificed, I would always be his daughter. And, in his eyes, that was a limitation. It was a crisp fall morning when everything came to a head. The air in the office was thick with the usual hum of productivity, but it felt like time had slowed down the moment I walked into my father's mahogany-paneled office. The faint smell of cigar smoke lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of leather-bound contracts and polished wood. My palms were sweaty as I gripped the proposal I had worked so tirelessly on. The hours spent poring over market reports, the endless revisions, the meetings, none of it had mattered. Today, I was going to prove to him that I had what it took to lead Grant Enterprises. I had to. This was my moment. But as I stood there, waiting for him to acknowledge me, my father's gaze never left his paperwork. His fingers flicked through the pages with the same indifference he always showed me. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't show weakness. Not now. Dorothy, he finally said, looking up briefly, you're wasting your time with this. It's a nice little hobby of yours, but we both know you'll never be as good as your brother. You should focus on finding a good husband. That's what your mother and I want for you. His words sliced through me like a knife. It was as if the years of education, the internships, the sleepless nights, and the sacrifices I had made meant absolutely nothing. I could feel the burn of humiliation rising in my chest, but I bit my tongue, refusing to let him see how much his words hurt. My brother Ben, who had been sitting in the corner, didn't even have the decency to look up from his phone. His disinterest in the conversation only made the sting worse. He had barely made it through business school, yet he was the one who was going to take over as coup next month, all because he was a man. I glanced down at the proposal in my hands, my fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't just a business plan to me. It was everything I had worked for. I had poured my heart into it, and now my father was dismissing it with a wave of his hand. The ache in my chest deepened, but I couldn't let it show. I had to hold it together. I had to be strong. Dad, please, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Just look at the proposal. The market analysis shows. He interrupted me with a dismissive flick of his hand. I've already decided. Ben will take over as coup. You should focus on your future, Dorothy. Find a good husband. It's what you're meant to do. I stood there, frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of his words crushing me. I could feel the anger rising inside of me, but I didn't let it show. Not yet. Instead, I forced a smile and nodded. You're right, I said quietly, smoothing the crumpled pages of the proposal. I should focus on my future. My father looked up, clearly surprised by my sudden compliance. He probably thought he had won. He had no idea that in that moment, I wasn't giving in. I was declaring war. I turned on my heel and walked out of his office, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the hall. I could feel his eyes on my back, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had spent my entire life trying to meet his expectations, trying to fit into the mold he had created for me. But not anymore. For the first time in my life, I realized that no matter what I did, I would never be enough for him. So I was done. That night, I sat in my apartment, the walls closing in around me as I sifted through the years of work one had put into understanding Grant Enterprises. The market reports, the contracts, the customer lists, all of it spread out before me like a treasure map, the key to a future that didn't involve my father. No one had ever thought I'd use this knowledge against them. After all, who would suspect the daughter they had underestimated all these years? But that's exactly what I was going to do. I was going to take everything I had learned, everything they had ignored, and use it to build something of my own. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. A message from my mother. "Your father means well, Dorothy. He just wants to protect you from the stress." I scoffed and turned off my phone without replying. My mother had always been the peacemaker, smoothing over the rough edges of my father's cruelty. But she had never stood up to him. Not once. And I was done waiting for someone else to fight my battles. The next morning, I walked into Grant Enterprises for what I knew would be the last time. As I packed up my desk in the marketing department, my colleagues avoided eye contact, the whispers already beginning to spread. They all knew about the meeting. They knew how my father had finally put me in my place. I could feel the pity in the air, and it made everything worse. I had worked so hard, and yet I had been dismissed because of my gender. I was nearly finished packing when Ben appeared in the doorway. He looked awkward, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Dad says you're taking some time off to think about your priorities," he said, his voice unsure. I looked at him, barely containing my anger. "You don't want this job, Ben. You're only taking it because it's easier than standing up to him." He flinched. But I didn't wait for him to respond. I grabbed my things and walked out, my small box of belongings in hand. As I passed through the glass doors, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection. I looked different, lighter somehow, as if I had shed the weight of my father's approval. I wasn't going to play by his rules anymore, and the world would soon see what I was capable of. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done playing by the rules my father set for me. As the days passed, the sting of his words, the cruel dismissal of my dreams fueled a fire inside of me. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had worked for, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, had been for nothing. But it wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. It was about building something of my own, something that no one could take away from me. So I did what I had to do. I walked out of Grant Enterprises with my head held high, but in the pit of my stomach, I was terrified. I didn't know where this journey would take me, or if I would even succeed, but I had no other choice. My entire life had been shaped by his expectations, and I was finally ready to break free. But breaking free wasn't easy. In fact, it was the hardest thing I had ever done. I moved into a small apartment in San Francisco, away from the opulence of the city I had spent my entire life in. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable, being on my own, but there was a strange sense of freedom in it too. I sat in the quiet of my new space, surrounded by piles of market reports, business plans, and charts. All of it, all the knowledge I had gathered over the years, suddenly felt like ammunition. I had spent years learning the ins and outs of the business world, learning every weakness, every opportunity within my father's company. And now, that knowledge would serve a purpose far beyond anything I could have imagined. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. I called in every favor I had, met with investors, pitched my idea over and over again until my throat was sore, and slowly but surely, I began to build something. Nova Tech Solutions was born not just out of spite, but out of necessity. I didn't want to compete with Grant Enterprises. I wanted to destroy the model my father had built. His world, his business, was built on outdated methods. His approach was stuck in the past, relying on relationships that were decades old, using systems that no longer made sense in a world that was changing rapidly. The world I was going to create would be different. Novatech would be agile, innovative, and disruptive. At first, things were slow. I hired a small team of engineers, software developers, and marketing professionals who shared my vision. They were young, ambitious, and eager to challenge the status quo. We worked out of a cramped office in downtown San Francisco, a far cry from the polished, glass-walled boardrooms I had grown up in. But it didn't matter. The energy in that office was electric. Every day felt like we were on the brink of something huge, something that could change the entire industry. I wasn't completely sure what direction we were going to take, but I knew we had to focus on one thing: supply chain management. My father's company, Grant Enterprises, was a giant in the industry, but their supply chain was a mess. It was inefficient, outdated, and in desperate need of a major overhaul. I could see the opportunity in front of me. If I could build a platform that streamlined their processes, something that used real-time data and artificial intelligence to predict market demands and optimize inventory, then I could do what my father never thought I could: disrupt his business. But disruption wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about building the technology, it was about convincing the world that this was the future. We had to get the investors on board. We had to convince companies to trust us. And most importantly, we had to prove that we were more than just a small startup with big ideas. We were going to be the solution to the problems my father's company couldn't solve. The first few months were the hardest. We struggled to secure funding, and every rejection felt like a blow to my confidence. I knew what I had to offer was revolutionary, but getting others to believe, that was another story. There were moments when I wondered if I had made a mistake, if walking away from everything I knew had been the right decision. But then I'd remember my father's face, his condescending tone, his dismissive attitude toward everything I had worked for. And suddenly, all the doubt disappeared. I wasn't just building a company, I was building a future that I could be proud of. It was during one of those sleepless nights, surrounded by whiteboards full of equations and flowcharts, that we hit our first major breakthrough. We had developed a prototype for our platform, a supply chain management system that used AI to predict shifts in the market, optimize inventory, and automate everything that my father's company was still doing manually. We didn't have the resources that Grant Enterprises had, but we had something better: agility, innovation, and a team that believed in the mission. The breakthrough didn't come without its challenges. We had to fine-tune the technology, run countless tests, and make sure everything worked perfectly before we could even think about pitching it to potential investors. But when we finally did, the response was overwhelming. A major tech investor reached out after seeing our demo. She was intrigued, excited even, about the potential for disruption. This was it. We had a real shot. We secured the funding we needed, and things started to move fast. We moved into a bigger office, hired more people, and began building a fully functional version of our platform. It felt like everything was falling into place. But the more success we achieved, the more I realized that we weren't just building a company, we were creating a legacy. A legacy that my father had dismissed so easily. I spent sleepless nights obsessing over every detail of the business. I had to get everything right. Every contract, every partnership, every detail of the technology had to be flawless. There was no room for error. I couldn't afford to fail, not when everything was on the line. But as the months passed, something unexpected happened. The world began to take notice. Our platform caught the attention of major companies in the industry, who saw the value in what we were doing. They started to adopt our technology, replacing the outdated systems they had relied on for years. One by one, we began to chip away at the market share my father had worked so hard to build. And as Novatech's reputation grew, Grant Enterprises began to feel the pressure. For the first time, my father's company was struggling. They were losing clients to us, unable to keep up with the speed and efficiency of our platform. I couldn't help but smile every time I saw a new headline about Grant Enterprises losing market share. My father had spent his entire career building an empire based on old-fashioned methods, and now the world was leaving him behind. But I wasn't content with just taking market share. I wasn't content with just being the next big thing in the tech world. No, I wanted more. I wanted to prove to my father that everything he had told me, everything he had made me believe was wrong. I wanted to show him that a woman could lead a company just as well as any man. I wanted him to realize that by dismissing me, he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The tension between our two companies continued to build, and with every passing day, I could feel the weight of the competition getting heavier. But it wasn't just competition anymore. It was personal. I wasn't just trying to beat Grant Enterprises, I was trying to bury it. I was trying to prove that I could create something better, something that would change the way the world did business. And with every victory, with every new client we landed, I knew I was one step closer to showing my father exactly what he had lost when he dismissed me. The battle was far from over, but I could already see the endgame taking shape. And this time I wasn't going to lose. Now that I've made my move, you might be wondering what happens next. Will one be able to keep fighting back against my father's empire? Or will his company swallow me whole? What do you think will happen next? Will Novatech survive? Or will Grant Enterprises crush my dreams? Drop your guess in the comments. Comment 111 if you think I'll win, or 225 if you think my father will come out on top. The first real taste of success came so much faster than I had expected. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. After all, we had a product that could change the entire supply chain management industry, something Grant Enterprises had never managed to get right. But even with all the preparation, the long hours, and the relentless work we'd put in, when the moment came, it hit me like a freight train. It was a feeling of triumph mixed with disbelief. I had spent years looking up to my father's company, trying to be part of the legacy he had built, and now, here I was creating something that was going to break it all down. The stakes had never been higher. We had just finished a major round of testing for our platform. The AI-driven system we were developing was running smoother than I had ever imagined. I could feel the momentum building. I remember that morning so clearly, sitting in the new office space we had moved into in San Francisco, the team working feverishly around me. It wasn't glamorous. In fact, the office itself was cramped, and the air conditioning didn't exactly keep up with the warm California sun streaming through the windows. But the energy in that room was like nothing I had ever experienced. I could see it in their eyes. My team was just as invested in this as I was. They weren't just here for the paycheck. They were here to make history. That's when the email came in. A prominent tech investor, someone I had admired for years, wanted to meet with us. She had seen the demo of our platform and was eager to discuss funding. I couldn't believe it. After months of hustling, pitching, and rejection, this was the breakthrough we had been waiting for. We quickly set up a meeting. I wasn't sure if I was more excited or terrified, but the butterflies in my stomach kept me focused. This was the moment. This was the chance we had been working toward. The day of the meeting arrived, and as I stepped into the sleek, glass-walled conference room, my heart raced. I knew that Novatech was ready, but would she believe in it the way we did? Would she see the potential in our idea, or would she dismiss us like so many others had? The door opened, and in walked the investor, confident, composed, and sharp. I could tell right away that she wasn't interested in wasting time. She got straight to the point, asking questions about scalability, security, and market potential. I answered each question as best as I could, feeling the weight of the opportunity pressing down on me. But there was no turning back now. As the meeting progressed, I could feel the shift. Her body language changed, her posture relaxed. I was talking about more than just numbers and projections. I was talking about revolutionizing an industry. And I could see that she was starting to get it. By the end of the meeting, the decision was made. She was in. She saw the vision, saw the potential. She wanted to be a part of it. That was when it all started to fall into place. With the funding secured, we moved faster than I could have ever imagined. We were able to hire more developers, grow the team, and begin scaling up the platform. Every day felt like we were on the cusp of something huge. I had spent years chasing my father's approval, fighting for a seat at the table in his company. But now, here I was, building something completely my own, something that was going to change the game. As we grew, it became clear that we were on to something big. But with success came the inevitable pressure to deliver. Every investor, every partner, every customer was watching us. Our product had to be perfect, and it had to be fast. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on my shoulders, but I wasn't about to let it break me. If anything, it pushed me harder. I became obsessed with making Novatech the best it could be. Every glitch, every bug, every misstep was a setback. But every success, every little victory, was a reminder that we were headed in the right direction. We were changing the way supply chains operated. We were building the future. The media started to take notice. Tech blogs, business publications, even mainstream outlets began covering Novatech's rise. We were the new kids on the block, but we were growing fast, and we were already making a name for ourselves. The competition started to feel the pressure, especially Grant Enterprises. My father's company, once a giant in the industry, was beginning to falter. Clients that had been loyal to Grant for years were starting to look at our platform, at our system, and they were making the switch. The writing was on the wall, and I was doing everything in my power to ensure it was a story my father would never forget. But it wasn't just about beating Grant Enterprises. It wasn't even just about proving my father wrong. It was about building something that stood on its own, that didn't rely on the weight of a family name or the expectations of a father. This was my legacy. The more success we found, the more people began to talk, and the more I realized that what we were creating was not just a business, it was a revolution. A revolution that was going to change how the entire industry operated. But as the pressure mounted, I found myself more and more consumed by it all. I wasn't sleeping much. I was constantly checking in with the team, pushing them harder, making sure every detail was just right. It was exhausting, mentally and physically, but I couldn't stop. I had spent so long trying to meet my father's expectations, trying to fit into a world that wasn't meant for me. Now, I was in control, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. Then, we hit our first major milestone. We went live with a fully functional version of our platform, and it took off. Businesses that had been struggling with inefficiency and outdated methods were now turning to us, relying on the technology we had developed to streamline their operations. We were a threat, and that's when the calls started coming in from my father's team. They were noticing us. They were feeling the heat, and I could see it all unfolding. Grant Enterprises was no longer the undisputed leader in the industry. We were catching up, fast. I couldn't help but smile when I read the first report about Grant losing market share in Asia. I knew it was just the beginning. My father had spent decades building his empire, relying on his personal relationships and old-school methods to keep his business afloat. But now, those methods were becoming obsolete. The world was changing, and Grant Enterprises was too slow to keep up. Meanwhile, Novatech was poised to take over, to be the new leader in the industry. The more I watched Grant struggle, the more I realized how much power I had. I was no longer just the daughter of a CEO who had been ignored and dismissed. I was a force to be reckoned with. And I was just getting started. The momentum we had built with Novatech was undeniable, and every day that passed seemed to bring us closer to a level of success I had once only dreamed of. But it wasn't without its challenges. The competition, especially Grant Enterprises, wasn't going to lie down quietly. I knew the battle wasn't just about building a great product. It was about showing the world, showing my father, that we could not only match what his company had done, but that we could do it better, faster, and smarter. And let me tell you, that feeling of power, it was like nothing I had ever experienced. In the months that followed, the more we pushed forward, the more the stakes felt like they were rising. We had secured the funding we needed, and with it, we had expanded the team. There were days when the pressure seemed almost unbearable. I remember sitting in that small office one we had outgrown, almost immediately surrounded by developers who were working day and night to fine-tune our platform. The sense of urgency in the air was palpable. Every new feature we added, every new client we secured, was like adding fuel to the fire of this competition. But the fire didn't feel like it was burning me out. It felt like it was pushing me further, motivating me to make sure nothing would stand in our way. I would sit at my desk, staring at the screens in front of me, tracking our growth and thinking about how far we had come. Every report that came in about Grant Enterprises losing clients, about our platform becoming the go-to choice for industries, looking for real-time supply chain management, was a personal victory. I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction when I saw the numbers. The numbers didn't lie. Our system was working, and it was working better than anything my father's company had to offer. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, I found myself facing an unexpected setback. As Novatech grew, so did the scrutiny. Our competitors, Grant Enterprises chief among them, started to take notice in ways that weren't entirely flattering. I knew it was only a matter of time before the big guns took aim at us. The first shot came when one of my biggest clients told me they had been approached by Grant Enterprises with a new offer. They said they were offering a better deal, and that they were going to stick with the tried and true systems they had always used. I didn't panic, at least, not on the outside. But inside, a wave of panic started to rise. I knew this was coming. I had always known. My father wouldn't just sit back and let me challenge him, but I wasn't going to fold. I couldn't. So I did what I had done from the start. I doubled down. I called a meeting with my team. We reviewed every client relationship we had, every contract we had signed, and every deal on the table. I knew that if we lost this client, it wouldn't just be a setback, it would be a sign that Grant Enterprises still had the power to keep clients loyal, to make people doubt the new guy on the block. And I wasn't about to let that happen. We didn't waste any time. I spent hours on the phone with our remaining clients, reassuring them that we were still the best option for their future. I crafted personalized proposals, highlighting the very things that made our system unbeatable. The personal touch we could offer, the speed, the efficiency. Grant Enterprises might have had a reputation, but we had innovation on our side. It was a fight for our survival, but I wasn't afraid to fight back. Then came the breakthrough that turned the tide. One of our new investors, a woman who had been an entrepreneur for years and had seen her fair share of industry giants come and go, offered an idea that would change everything. She suggested that we go on the offensive. Instead of continuing to play defense, we needed to show the world just how much better we were. We needed to expose the flaws in my father's company, the cracks that had formed over the years as they clung to outdated systems. We had a platform that could provide faster, more reliable service, and we needed to show the world just how obsolete the old ways had become. We began running a series of ads and campaigns that would highlight our strengths, how we could save companies time and money with our system. We used case studies from our current clients, showing how they had reduced inefficiencies and costs by switching to Novatech. It wasn't just a marketing move, it was a declaration. We weren't just going to compete with Grant Enterprises, we were going to take them down piece by piece, one market at a time. Of course, the backlash came quickly. My father's team started sending out their own counter-proposals, offering discounts, offering more personalized services. But it wasn't enough. People were starting to realize that the future didn't lie in the hands of companies that were clinging to outdated practices. It was in the hands of companies that were willing to innovate, that were willing to take risks. And we were the ones taking those risks. We were the ones leading the charge. That's when the emails started coming in an avalanche of interest from companies that had once been hesitant to take a chance on a new player. The numbers were rolling in. Clients were abandoning my father's company for ours. And then came the first major shockwave. Grant Enterprises was losing market share, and fast. My heart raced as I read the reports. My father's company, the one that had been the undisputed leader for decades, was now slipping. It was a feeling I can't describe, part satisfaction, part disbelief. I had spent so many years trying to fit into his world, trying to earn his approval, and now I was watching his empire crumble under the weight of the changes we had made. It didn't take long before the phone calls started. Grant Enterprises was coming for us. I knew that the bigger the threat we became, the harder they would fight. But I also knew that we had something they didn't. We had the future on our side, and that future was moving faster than they could keep up with. It's hard to describe the feeling when everything you've worked so hard for begins to pay off. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer just fighting for survival. We were making waves, and we weren't going to stop. Every win, every client we brought on, every piece of positive feedback added fuel to my growing confidence. But even as we surged ahead, the reality of what we were up against hit me harder than I ever imagined. Grant Enterprises was struggling, but that didn't mean it was over. I knew they would fight back with everything they had. They wouldn't just let us steal their market share without a fight. I'd been waiting for this moment, the first sign of their retaliation, and it didn't take long. The first thing I noticed was the silence. For days, I heard nothing from my father's company. No outreach. No responses to our press releases. No public statements. It was eerie. And then it happened. The floodgates opened. It wasn't just one press release. It wasn't just a simple counter-advertisement. It was a full-on campaign to destroy us. Grant Enterprises came out swinging, offering discounts, special deals, and even doing interviews with prominent industry figures, all focused on how they were going to modernize their operations. But there was a catch. Every word felt hollow. It felt like a desperate attempt to rebrand themselves as the future when, in reality, they were still stuck in the past. The press ate it up, of course. It was a classic move. They had the resources, the name, the history. They were the giant. And no matter how good we were, no matter how much innovation we brought to the table, we would always be the underdog. I couldn't help but feel the weight of that truth sinking in. Here I was, fighting a battle I had no intention of losing, but there was something in my gut telling me that this wasn't going to be an easy fight. They were going to throw everything they had at us, and in a way, that scared me. But it also fueled me. I wasn't about to let Grant Enterprises win this battle. I wasn't about to let my father's company, his legacy, crush everything I had worked for. So we fought back, and we fought smart. I dug deeper into the data. I researched every move Grant Enterprises had made over the years, searching for weaknesses I could exploit. What I found wasn't surprising. They had become complacent. They had rested on their laurels for too long, and now, when they needed to adapt, they couldn't. They were stuck with old systems, old relationships, and an outdated view of the world. It was their biggest mistake. I called an emergency meeting with my team. We gathered in our small but vibrant office, the energy crackling in the air. Everyone was on edge, but there was also a palpable sense of determination. We were about to go on the offensive. We were going to expose the cracks in Grant Enterprises' armor. We knew their system couldn't keep up with the demands of a digital world, and we were going to show that to the world. We launched a targeted ad campaign, showcasing the flaws in Grant's model. We highlighted how their supply chain was inefficient, outdated, and prone to errors. We compared it to our own platform, showing how we could process orders in real time, optimize inventory, and predict market shifts, all without relying on the slow, cumbersome systems that Grant Enterprises used. The response was immediate. Clients who had been hesitant before began reaching out. They were seeing what we had been offering all along. Our platform wasn't just a better alternative, it was the future. But even as things began to look up, I knew that Grant Enterprises would hit back harder. They were too proud to go down without a fight. And that's exactly what they did. The next wave came fast, with accusations, rumors, and attempts to discredit us at every turn. My phone was buzzing, constantly calls from clients, investors, reporters, even family members. My father's company was going on the attack, but this time, I wasn't just playing defense. I was ready. We had been preparing for this. For weeks, we had been working on an entirely new feature for our platform. We had built an algorithm that could predict market trends with an accuracy no one had seen before. It was revolutionary, and we knew it would blow Grant Enterprises out of the water. I could feel the excitement building as we prepared for the launch. This was our chance to solidify our position as the true leaders in the industry. This was the game changer we had been working toward. The day of the launch was a blur. We were all on edge, waiting for the first wave of feedback to come in. I remember sitting in the conference room, staring at the screen as the numbers started to roll in. They were exactly what we had hoped for. Our clients were impressed. They saw the power of what we had built. And just as we had expected, Grant Enterprises took the bait. They tried to dismiss us, tried to call our innovations overhyped and unnecessary. But the world was already seeing the difference. Their outdated methods were no longer enough to keep them in the game. The press coverage came next, and this time, it wasn't just about our product. It was about the entire narrative we had been pushing. We were the disruptors, the innovators, the ones changing the landscape, and as much as I hated to admit it, I could see my father's company unraveling. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, and yet, I couldn't look away. Every day, there was a new article about how Grant Enterprises was losing market share, struggling to keep up with the competition. My father's legacy, the empire he had worked so hard to build, was crumbling, and I was the one responsible for it. But still, there was something bittersweet about it. I had spent so many years wishing for my father's approval, working tirelessly to prove myself to him. And now, here I was, watching his company sink into oblivion. The truth was, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Yes, we were winning. Yes, we were proving that we were the future. But as I watched my father's company falter, a small part of me felt sad. Maybe it was the daughter in me, still wanting to be seen, still wanting to be validated. But then I remembered why I was doing this. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing this for me. I was doing this to show the world, and myself, that I didn't need his approval to succeed. And as Novatech's success continued to rise and Grant Enterprises continued to fall, I realized that this wasn't just a business battle. It was about more than just market share. It was about reclaiming my own power, my own legacy, and proving that I could create something that was truly mine. And with every new victory, I knew I was one step closer to making that happen. The following days after our major breakthrough felt like a whirlwind. The press was eating up our story. Novatech, the underdog company, had launched a product that was disrupting an entire industry. Every day, my phone buzzed with new emails, messages from investors, clients reaching out with interest, and even calls from reporters wanting to know more. It was exactly what I had worked for, what I had hoped for, but it came with a new weight that I hadn't anticipated. Now that we were on the map, now that the world was watching, I couldn't afford to falter. Not for a second. The pressure was on. I spent more hours in the office than I'd ever planned on. The team was working at full throttle, and I couldn't afford to let up now. But the excitement was infectious. Everyone was pushing themselves harder, more creatively. Our developers were coming up with new features. Our marketing team was crafting campaigns to showcase every new piece of technology we'd integrated into our platform, and our sales team was closing deals faster than I could keep up with. The energy in the office was electric, and for the first time, it felt like we were really doing something that mattered. But with success always comes the scrutiny. And not just the kind you can brush off, the kind that makes you second-guess everything. My phone started buzzing more than ever, but it wasn't just clients calling to congratulate us anymore. The first real competitor had come out of the woodwork, Grant Enterprises, and they weren't happy. The press releases began rolling in, and the tactics they used were something straight out of the playbook of every industry giant. It started subtly, an article here, a blog post there denouncing what we were doing. They called our platform experimental, untested, overhyped. I couldn't help but smile when I saw their attempt to downplay us. They didn't realize just how far ahead we already were. But then things escalated. They started targeting our clients, reaching out to the companies who had recently signed on with us, offering better deals and more reliable service. I knew they would do whatever it took to try to win back their market share. And let's be honest, if it were any other company, I might have even respected their strategy. But this wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. The phone calls I got next weren't the congratulatory ones anymore. They were from our clients, asking questions. Concerned looks, nervous conversations. Is everything all right with Novatech? We've been hearing things. The doubts had started creeping in, and I wasn't about to let them fester. So I did what I had done before I turned it around. I wasn't going to sit back and let them take everything we had built. I called a team meeting that afternoon. I stood in front of the group, taking a deep breath. The room was quiet, the usual energy replaced by an undercurrent of tension. We knew this was coming, I said, my voice steady but firm. They won't go down without a fight. And they'll try to scare our clients, scare our investors, scare everyone into doubting what we're doing. But they're wrong. I paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. I had to be the one to show them that we weren't just a startup playing in a sandbox. We were here to stay. We've got a product that works. We've got the proof. We've got results. And we've got something they'll never have, the future. We know how to move fast. We know how to adapt. And we know how to disrupt. The team nodded, a few heads rising with new resolve. I could see it, everyone knew what we had to do. It wasn't just about pushing harder, it was about outsmarting them. I wasn't going to let my father's company make us second-guess ourselves. We had spent too long proving we could do it. Now we just had to push harder, stay smarter, and fight back. We began refining our platform even more. We made small adjustments, added new features that we knew would give us the upper hand in the industry. We knew we couldn't just stay static. We had to keep improving, keep showing the world that we were more than just a trend. I called in a few of our top clients and made sure they knew exactly how we were going to continue to improve the system, offering them a front row seat to our next steps. They needed to hear from me, not just read about it in the news. And as the next round of updates went live, it was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were in control. We had the next step planned, and we weren't stopping. But no matter how many steps ahead we stayed, no matter how much we improved, there was always that lingering thought in the back of my mind. Was it enough? Could we really keep this momentum going? I had to believe it, had to trust the work we'd put in. And when the numbers came in, when we saw the increase in clients, the way our platform was gaining more traction, the satisfaction that washed over me was undeniable. We were doing it. We were making it. And the best part? We weren't just challenging an industry leader, we were beating them at their own game. The old guard was starting to crumble, and Novatech was leading the charge. But then came the call I had been expecting, the one that made everything feel real. Grant Enterprises reached out. They wanted to acquire us. The offer was more money than I could have ever imagined. The kind of money that would change everything for me, for the team. But I didn't hesitate for a second. I didn't even think about it. We weren't going to sell. We weren't going to let someone else take the credit for what we had built. We had worked too hard, fought too long, and come too far. Decline the offer, I told my CFO. We're not for sale. Not now, not ever. The message was clear. We were in it to win it. And no matter how much Grant Enterprises threw at us, no matter how many offers or deals they tried to push, we weren't backing down. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about proving that we could do this on our own terms. And as the weeks passed and the pressure mounted, I knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. The tension in the air was thick the morning the offer from Grant Enterprises landed on my desk. I had expected it to come sooner or later, but nothing could prepare me for the weight of it. They wanted to buy us, take us under their wing, make us a part of their failing empire. I knew it was coming, but still, the offer hit harder than I had anticipated. They offered more money than I could ever dream of. They were trying to buy us out, trying to take what we had built and turn it into one of their acquisitions. They thought they could swallow us whole and that would be the end of it. But they didn't understand us. They didn't understand me. I had fought too hard for this too long to let them take what I had earned with a simple check. I was sitting in the sleek, glass-walled office that we had just moved into. The city sprawled out beneath me. When I opened the email, it was all laid out there, the numbers, the terms, the promises of what they could offer if we agreed. The offers were tempting. They knew how to sell it, how to make it sound like this was the right choice. They made it seem like they were offering us the world, more resources, more reach, a chance to grow exponentially. But I knew it wasn't about the future. It was about control. It was about their need to keep their hold on everything, even if that meant buying out the company that had the potential to crush them. I stared at the offer for a long time, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on me. The world was watching. We were now the talk of the industry, and every move we made mattered. Novatech was more than just a company. It was my redemption, my statement to the world. And I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me. Especially not my father. Especially not the company that had never believed in me. They were so sure I would bend under pressure. They were so sure I would take the easy route and sell out. I didn't respond immediately. I needed to think. Needed to digest the enormity of what was on the table. I couldn't just jump in and make a decision on impulse. But deep down, I already knew what I had to do. We were not for sale. Not now, not ever. I called a meeting with my board. They were anxious, eager to hear my thoughts. They'd seen the offer, just like I had, and I could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. There was no shame in accepting the offer. After all, it was a massive payday. But as I looked around the table, I could see the fire that had brought us this far. The same fire that had burned in my chest since the day I walked away from Grant Enterprises. "We're not selling," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "This is ours. We built this, and we're not giving it away." I could feel the room hesitate, but I stood firm. I had built something that was mine, something that didn't need validation, something that didn't need approval. The battle with Grant Enterprises had never been about the money. It had never been about what they could offer. It was about proving to myself, to the world, that I didn't need my father's company to succeed. I didn't need his legacy to make my own. "But the offer, Dorothy, it's more than we could ever dream of," my CFO said, a hint of concern in his voice. "Think about what we could do with those resources. We could scale like never before." I understood. The temptation was real. The promise of expansion, the power of the Grant name behind us, the smooth path to success. It was easy to say yes. It was easy to take the money and walk away. But I wasn't that person anymore. "No," I said, my voice firm. "We're not selling out. We're going to keep fighting. This is about more than just growth. It's about integrity. It's about doing this on our terms." The room fell silent. I could see the concern in their eyes, but there was also respect. They trusted me. They knew why I had built this company. I wasn't going to let it be bought, not by the very people who had dismissed me for so long. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. We had come so far, but this was our defining moment. I wasn't going to let it slip away, not when we had worked so hard to build something truly ours. That night, as I sat alone in my office, the reality of the situation hit me. I was playing in the big leagues now. Grant Enterprises wasn't going to let me go without a fight. And as I looked out over the skyline of the city, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had fought this battle every step of the way, and now it was time to take it to the next level. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with my team. I had already made up my mind. We were not going to give in. We weren't going to bow to Grant Enterprises. We were going to outsmart them. We were going to push forward and show the world that Novatech wasn't just another flash in the pan. We were here to stay. I knew that we had to turn the tide. The world was watching us, and if we showed any sign of weakness, they would pounce. But if we stood strong, if we showed that we weren't afraid of Grant Enterprises, that we weren't going to bend under the pressure, we would not only survive, we would thrive. We launched an aggressive campaign in response to the offer. We put out a statement making it clear that Novatech was independent, that we weren't for sale, and that we were going to continue disrupting the industry. The media picked it up instantly, and soon the headlines were filled with news of Grant Enterprises' failed attempt to acquire us. It wasn't just about standing our ground, it was about making a statement. And the statement was clear: we were not just another competitor. We were the future. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The media attention was intense. Everyone wanted to know what was next for Novatech. Were we really going to challenge Grant Enterprises? Were we going to succeed in taking down the giant? My father's company was struggling, and they were fighting back, but they weren't moving fast enough. Novatech was agile, we were innovative, and we were driven. We had built something truly disruptive, and we were on the verge of changing the game completely. Then came the call. It was my father. For the first time in what felt like forever, he reached out. He wanted to meet. He wanted to talk about the future of the company. I couldn't help but laugh. After all these years of him dismissing me, telling me I wasn't good enough, now he wanted to talk. He was desperate. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't looking forward to seeing the look on his face when he realized what I had built. When the day came, I stood in front of the conference room with a calmness I had never felt before. He walked in with his usual arrogance, his posture rigid, but when his eyes locked on me, I saw the doubt. He had underestimated me. And now he was about to find out exactly what that mistake had cost him. The day of the meeting felt surreal. I had always imagined this moment, but never like this. Here I was, standing in the heart of our company's conference room, staring out at the city below, knowing that today wasn't just any meeting, it was the turning point of everything I had fought for. This was where everything would either fall into place or fall apart. The clock ticked louder in my ears as I adjusted the sleeve of my blazer. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. This was it. I had spent years working tirelessly to carve out my own path, to prove to the world and, more importantly, to myself that I could build something real, something that didn't rely on my father's company or legacy. Novatech was more than just a business. It was my statement. And now, here I was, about to face the man who had spent my entire life telling me that I couldn't succeed without him. The man who had dismissed me, belittled me, and turned his back on everything I was capable of. My father, Walter Grant, had been the king of his empire for decades. Grant Enterprises was a household name. His business was the one that everyone respected, the one everyone aspired to be like. But the world had changed, and so had I. The company he had built was crumbling under the weight of outdated practices, unwilling to adapt to the future. And it was my company, Novatech, that was leading the charge to replace it. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my life working under his thumb, hoping for his approval, and now it was time for me to show him exactly what I was capable of. The door opened and he walked in, his usual air of authority filling the room. I could see the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, the tension in his posture. His sharp suit and polished shoes were the same ones he'd worn in every meeting for as long as I could remember. But today, something was different. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw it uncertainty. He wasn't expecting to see me sitting at the head of the table, and I could tell it threw him off. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking to him for validation. He didn't waste any time. "What is this, Dorothy?" His voice was sharp, demanding answers. "What are you playing at?" I met his gaze and held it steady. "No game, Dad," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Just business." He stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the space. I could tell he was looking for some kind of reassurance, some sign that this was all some kind of mistake. But there was no mistake. Novatech wasn't some side project or pet project anymore. It was the future, my future. and I wasn't about to let him or his company steal it away from me. His gaze landed on the presentation screen behind me, and his expression shifted. He wasn't ready for this. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that this wasn't going to go the way he had planned. His company, the one he had spent his life building, was facing the biggest threat it had ever encountered. And the threat wasn't some faceless competitor. It was me, his own daughter, the one he had dismissed for so long. "You did this to destroy me?" His voice shook slightly, and I could see the anger rising in him. But there was something else there too, fear. "Your own father?" I stood up slowly, walking around the table to stand directly in front of him. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I wasn't about to let him see that. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let him steal it from me now. "No, Dad," I said, my voice steady, stronger than I ever imagined it would be. "I did this because you taught me that being a woman meant I couldn't run a company. So I built one instead, one that's better than yours in every way." I could see the shock on his face. The words hit him like a slap. He wasn't used to hearing me speak this way. He wasn't used to seeing me stand up for myself, not like this. For years, I had tried to fit into his world, to meet his expectations. But now it was time for him to see what he had missed, what he had failed to recognize all these years. The daughter he had dismissed as nothing more than a distraction was now the one who had outsmarted him. "You think you can just take my company?" He scoffed, shaking his head as if this was all some kind of joke. "You think you can build something from nothing and take everything I've worked for?" I met his eyes. "I didn't take anything from you, Dad," I said, my voice unwavering. "You gave it to me. You handed me this opportunity, the moment you decided I wasn't good enough to lead." The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the shuffle of papers from the board members seated around the table, the tension palpable. My father's advisors, the ones who had always been loyal to him, were now looking around the room, exchanging nervous glances. They weren't sure what to make of this. They weren't sure who was in control anymore. But I was in control. I always had been. I had been the one to build Novatech, the one to make it what it was today. It wasn't just about proving my father wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could do this. I could lead. I could build something that wasn't just a legacy, it was mine. His advisors tried to intervene, but I wasn't having it. I cut them off with a wave of my hand. "I didn't come here to negotiate, Dad," I said, taking a step closer to him. "You want to know what I want? I want to show you how little your company has left. I want to show you how outdated your systems are, how you've let the world pass you by. And most importantly, I want to show you that I don't need you to succeed. I don't need your approval. Not anymore." I could see the anger rising in his face. But underneath it, I could also see the fear. He had spent his entire career building an empire, one that was now crumbling at the hands of his own daughter. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The meeting went on, but I knew there was no turning back. The future wasn't in his hands anymore, it was in mine. And as I looked around the room, at the people who had once doubted me, I knew they were all seeing me in a new light. I had built something bigger than myself, something that couldn't be bought, couldn't be controlled. I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was Dorothy Grant, the founder and CEO of Novatech, and I had just won the game. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to my father, trying to be what he wanted me to be, trying to fit into his narrow view of what success looked like. But standing in that conference room, watching his face twist with disbelief and frustration, something finally clicked. I had spent too much of my life seeking approval from someone who would never see me for who I truly was. For so long, I had been told that I wasn't good enough, that I would never measure up, and it had eaten away at me. But now, as I stood there, a businesswoman in my own right, something deep inside of me told me that the time had come for me to move on, to leave behind the shackles of my father's expectations and step into the person I had always been meant to become. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of creating something that didn't rely on his approval, something that didn't need to be validated by the legacy of Grant Enterprises. The world had changed, and so had I. Novatech wasn't just my company, it was my declaration to the world that I was no longer just Walter Grant's daughter. I was Dorothy Grant, and I was going to lead not just to survive, but to thrive. But even after everything we had accomplished, the hardest part still lay ahead. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of notifications, emails from clients, messages from investors, even family members reaching out, wanting to know more. The news had spread like wildfire. Grant Enterprises struggles as Novatech soars was the headline that dominated every major news outlet. And with it came the realization that our disruption of the industry had only just begun. I had always been the one to keep a calm and collected demeanor, but even now, as I sat in the quiet of my office, the weight of everything seemed overwhelming. I looked out the window at the sprawling city below, wondering if I had truly made the right decision. No part of me had ever questioned my choice to walk away from my father's world, but I'd never imagined it would be like this. We were now at the top, but that didn't mean the battle was over. If anything, it was just beginning. The days that followed were filled with tension. Every move we made was scrutinized, every decision questioned. But with every challenge, I felt a sense of strength I had never known before. The reality of what we were building, how we were changing the game, hit me harder than ever. There was no turning back now. No matter what happened, we had set the stage for something bigger than any one company or person. We were changing the entire landscape of the industry, and no one could stop us. But just as things seemed to be settling into a rhythm, Grant Enterprises made their move. I knew they wouldn't let us continue to rise without trying to bring us down. What I hadn't expected, though, was just how aggressive they would be. They reached out to every one of our clients, offering cut-rate deals, trying to buy back their loyalty with promises of better service and personalized attention. The stakes had been raised, and now it felt like we were in a full-blown war. One couldn't ignore it any longer. It was time to face my father's company head-on. We immediately launched a counter-campaign, showcasing all of the ways Novatech was superior to Grant Enterprises. We didn't just talk about our technology. We showed the results. We had real-time market data, an AI-driven platform that could optimize inventory and predict trends, everything that Grant Enterprises had been too slow to adopt. I could see the looks on the faces of my team members as they prepared the presentations, wrote the scripts, and crafted our strategy. They were just as determined as I was. We weren't going to let our hard work be erased by a few desperate moves from my father's company. This was our moment. The media coverage exploded as our counter-campaign took flight. We didn't just fight back, we exposed the weaknesses of their outdated systems, the slow-moving bureaucracy that had been their downfall. The more we pushed, the more their cracks started to show. Grant Enterprises couldn't keep up with the speed at which Novatech was growing. They were losing clients by the day. And the best part? They knew it. The reports that came in made my heart race. We were pulling away faster than I had ever dreamed. But even as I watched my father's empire struggle, there was something inside me that didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected. The anger I had carried for so long, the resentment toward the way I had been treated all these years, began to shift. I wasn't just fighting for revenge. I was fighting for something greater for my own future, for the company I had built, for the people who had believed in me from the start. But there was a part of me, buried deep down, that wondered if my father had truly seen me for who I was, or if he had just seen his failure in me all along. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had walked away from his world, from his company, and had created something that was now threatening to bring him down. But as the tension mounted, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of empathy for him. Here he was, the man who had everything, the power, the wealth, the legacy, and it was slipping through his fingers. I realized that in some ways I was still his daughter. And no matter how much I had worked to distance myself, I could never fully sever that connection. And then it happened. The call I had been expecting finally came. It was from my father. He wanted to meet. Part of me was relieved. I had spent so many years wondering what it would be like to finally sit down with him as equals. I wasn't the naive girl who had once begged for his approval. Now, I was a businesswoman, the leader of a company that was changing the world, but another part of me was still holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this meeting could offer some form of closure. Maybe it would be a chance for him to see me not as his daughter, but as a woman who had built something on her own. We met in a neutral location, not in his office, not in mine. I knew he wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to being the one who had to prove himself. But as we sat down across from each other, I could see the cracks in his armor. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The tables had turned, and he knew it. "You've made your point, Dorothy," he said, his voice quiet, almost defeated. "But you've cost me everything. You've taken it all from me." I looked at him, the man who had built an empire, the man who had spent so many years telling me that I couldn't do this on my own. "No, Dad. You did this. You made the choices that got us here. You built this company on old ways, and I came in and built something better. I didn't take anything from you. You lost it because you didn't believe in me. You never did." The words felt final, like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I had said everything I needed to say. I had built something incredible from the ground up, and now I was finally standing on my own, with no one's approval needed but my own. As I left that meeting, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. I had done it. I had created something that would stand the test of time. Novatech wasn't just my victory, it was the victory of everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. Everyone who had been underestimated. We were the future, and no one could take that away from us. The next chapter had just begun, and I was ready to write it on my terms. You've seen the fight unfold, but here's the million-dollar question: did I really get my revenge? Or was it just a game of survival? I'm about to reveal the moment that changed everything. When the world finally saw me for who I truly am. Will my father's legacy crumble, or will it haunt me forever? You're not going to want to miss this part. Hit that comment section and tell me, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? The biggest lesson I learned is that you don't need anyone's approval to succeed, especially not from those who doubt you. We all have the power to create our own path, no matter where we come from or what others expect of us. If I had stayed in my father's shadow, I would have never built Novatech. The world will try to tell you that you're not enough, but don't listen. Believe in yourself, trust your vision, and fight for what's yours. Success isn't handed to you, it's earned step by step against every obstacle. So, take control of your future and never back down.